This is Alexander Constantine, and you're listening to the Dicenius Review, where we discuss novels, film, art, and culture from a perspective outside the mainstream. The review is a Substack podcast, but you can listen to us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, and anywhere else via RSS. If you enjoy the show, please hop on YouTube, Apple, or Spotify and like, follow, and share this episode. It's a beautiful Sunday morning in the Low Country. It's late spring now, and all the birds I like to watch are back. Cardinals, mockingbirds, Carolina wrens, titmouses, and house finches. On beautiful days like this, I'm finding it harder and harder to go up to my office to read or to write. The whole internet feels more like a digital yoke connecting me to a world that I have less and less interest in. But here I am, recording a new episode of this podcast because, after all, I enjoy a good conversation, and if I'm going to be trapped in this digital labyrinth, I might as well make the best of it. So some updates for everyone. Last week, I went on Walt Bismarck's show to talk about AI art. Since the AI art issue sprung up several years ago, I have made it clear that I'm not in favor of it. Unlike a lot of the others, though, my concern is not an economic, but a spiritual one. I find it ugly and inhuman, and we already live in a world filled with ugly plastic inhumanity. But that's not why I brought up the show I did last week. The thing is, Walt Bismarck is a very divisive and contentious figure in the internet circles, so after my appearance, I got a flood of messages asking me why I'm even talking to the guy. To answer that is because I envision our internet space to be a cafe, where you can sit with strangers and have a conversation about anything and everything. I don't agree with Walt on almost anything, but I'll sit down and have a conversation because I find it valuable to discuss issues in an external manner in order to sharpen my own understanding. I hope this answers any questions about the conversation, and I do think that this episode is worth listening to, so hop on over to his Substack. Anyways, today's guest is one I have been excited to talk to for a while now, is Mr. Sam Kahn, a documentary producer, journalist, writer, and fellow Substacker. Sam Kahn writes the fantastically erudite Substack Castalia, which was given a Substack 2024 featured publication, and Sam edited the latest issue of Substack Reads, right, which I got in my email the other day. Hey, Sam, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, welcome. I mean, we were trying to get this set up, and then I completely messed up the date last week. I had you down for Saturday.
That's a problem. I love it. I love it when other people screw up the schedule instead of me.
It is my first time ever where I actually I try my best. I have a really busy schedule between work, wife, daughters, different dance events, and everything. And I have our entire. We share a family calendar, and my wife adds events, and I add events and things that I need to be covered for. And I don't know how I messed that up because I have never done that. And I put you on Saturday, I put you on Sunday, but it was supposed to be a Saturday. But yeah, so do you mind telling us a little bit about yourself? Give us the listeners and readers an introduction on who you are and what you do exactly, if you don't mind.
Sure. I mean, I think you covered it nicely already. I grew up in New York. I spent most of my life in New York. The bulk of my career has been as a documentary producer. I've done a lot of journalism, and basically the entire time I've just been trying to write. And so that's just pouring out all kinds of writing, which usually meant going straight into my laptop. And so Substack, which I've been doing for the last couple of years, has been huge for me. It's just been an outlet. It's kind of been my happy place, essentially. It's just where I've been putting a lot of writing across a lot of different genres, and also where I've been finding people, just kind of finding a community that definitely didn't exist in my life before then.
Right. That's actually exactly why I love Substack. Were you on it since the very beginning?
No, I discovered it in mid-2022, and I was going through a crisis about sort of all kinds of things. So it seemed like the right kind of vessel to express some of the various angsts that I was dealing with.
All right, that makes sense. So I was, reading through Substack the other day, and your last essay on Castalia, which is what you named your Substack, is it named after the glass bead game or the Muse's fountain?
Oh, you got that? Yeah, almost. So you're the first person I've talked to who's had any connection to Kyrgyzstan. You're the first, I think, who's figured out what Kastalia is. Yeah, it's an obscure-ish reference to the glass speed game, and sort of the idea is that it's this kind of like intellectual preserve where people are just interested in kind of the life of the mind and
Right,
interested in
the utopia.
discussing things in a very free way. Yeah, yeah, in a very utopian-ish sort of way.
I'm surprised nobody's got it before. That was the first thing I thought about. I was okay, he's the Herman Hesse fan, and it's the utopia in the book.
You're the first one of the first people I was in touch with was is kind of a well-known German scholar, and he didn't figure it out. He thought it was something else.
Okay, well then I feel erudite all of a sudden. But yeah, so your last big essay was the one about healthy artistic culture, right? Do you think we have a healthy artistic culture in our world today? Because
Yeah,
you're pretty
it's
positive
kind
in
of
it.
better than it. I was surprised at how positive I was because most of what I write about on there is usually railing about the culture as it is. I mean, there's a lot. There are a few things that I really care about. Like I really care about. I'm using the word safe space and kind of not its normal meaning, which is just this feeling of like if you're in a rehearsal room or something like that. There's you really need to be in a space where just anything is okay. You know, people can be very different from their normal social persona and have to have a license to take risk. And to a surprising extent, that does exist. I mean, there's just a lot of great stuff that's made all the time, great films that are made, but there's a lot of stuff that I get very unhappy with. There's a lot of the way people approach art tends to be in this very statusy kind of way. There are all these sort of hierarchies that we have, and a lot of it's dumb and a lot of it's very commercially driven. So a lot of what I spend my time kind of railing about on Substack is trying to get people to sort of undo that thing in their head and then just approach it a little bit differently. Forget about the sort of statusy stuff and take in sort of the richness that's out there and the richness that's inside of them. So that's a lot of what it is. But then it's also like, I mean, people are really expressive, and that's kind of what I think I care about is that people are sort of free to express themselves and do it almost limitlessly. And there's almost more out there than you realize, especially if you're like paying attention to the prize winners or something, which can be a very limited view. There's a lot more out there that's good and a lot more out there that's interesting.
Right, absolutely. And I often get accused of being way too positive about the culture myself because unlike unlike a lot of people, I'm not all doom and gloom. I actually think that what we have today is really exciting. Yes, without a doubt, the old guard, the old institutions of art, literature, and music, and just entertainment as a whole, right? Our mass culture are falling apart because they're old and sclerotic. But in the cracks, there's so much great stuff, so much great music, so much great writing. Um, you just got to know where to find it. And if there's one problem with the massive information and the massive work out there, is that there's a lack of critical analysis of it, and there's a lot of critical kind of not, I wouldn't say oversight, but curating is the better word for it, right? And I think that's what, if we're going to improve the kind of independent culture, I think we need to focus on some good curating, and I think great places like Substack can do that.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. So a lot of what I've been writing about on the platform is there's this theorist Martin Geary who I feel like sort of figured out our whole era. And when I came across this book, The Revolt of the Public, I just haven't seen anything that kind of clinched it more than this. And just the idea is that for a long, long time, we've been in a particular information paradigm where it's I talk, you listen. It's kind of what the book is. It's what radio, TV, all these forms are, where there's somebody has the mic and everybody else just sort of has to shut up. And and it's and it just has to do with what that existing technology was. And that's just not the case anymore. The internet's much more of a two-way street. It creates all these possibilities of being genuinely democratic artistically, democratic in terms of expression that really never existed before, haven't existed for a long time. And so there's just this feeling that it's like, why not embrace what this era is giving us? And that's something that's really shifted. I noticed that shift within myself and kind of moving into a slightly different way of thinking about information and thinking about kind of like all the places to look for creativity. So it's been really cool for me to sort of discover that and almost like change, kind of repixelate my own brain to figure that out.
Right. And I mean, right now, you and I are across the planet from each other. I'm sitting in South Carolina in the morning, and you're in Central Asia. And we are recording a podcast that I'm going to put out tomorrow. And, about 2,000 people are going to listen to it on their way to work or from wherever they are. And that would be unheard of in the 90s or in the 80s when I was born. There's no way some guy like me, a independent novel writer, and you, an independent journalist, would get together and have this conversation in the past. And that is the fully democratizing aspect of the internet. And I hope that we can maintain it and retain this power of it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the main person, the main person on the planet that I've looked up to has been Walt Whitman, and sort of the whole vision that's there is this idea that being democratic isn't just about voting, that it's a whole state of mind. And so he's putting it in this sort of patriotic way, but the idea being that the American experiment is about sort of doing this so that you're treating literally everybody else as having a whole capacious universe inside of them. And then what you want to do as a person in the world, or as a creative person, is that you want to kind of open up your insides as much as possible, and then also have it in you to take in sort of everything that's going on with as many other people as possible, which is tough to do, but but I feel like that's the idea. I mean, that's the ideal.
Right. I fully agree. And, I'm going to take it back to Substack, because Substack seems to be a significant, platform for you. And you just recently did the Substack Reads, and you do have that Best of Substack 2024 badge on yours, and well deserved in my opinion. I mean, where do you see the platform going? Like, I love Substack, but I'm always terrified. I feel like it's so great, it's so great that I'm afraid that any minute now it's going to go the way of like Facebook or Insta. You know what I mean? Every time a new feature comes out, I'm like, notes, no, I hate it. Or they just did the video thing. I'm like, no, it's going to turn into TikTok. And I'm terrified of it. I'm like, I invested all my writing and this podcast is a Substack podcast, and I really do want them to work on giving us a lot more tools. But what do you think about the platform as a whole and their vision?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. It's something I've been thinking a lot about. I think, I mean, there's some issues that are fundamentally there, which is just having that you always worry about monopolies, and you always worry about just a company, whoever it is, that's running too much space. And so Substack feels like it's been kind of one blog to rule them all, that it's almost like the blogosphere was this very disparate thing, but it was incredibly disorganized, and Substack came in and sort of took over the blogosphere. And I think they've done a great job. The people I've met through Substack I just really like. I'm very convinced that their hearts are in the right place, but they do have a bottom line. I think they do have investors. They may well expect that at some point there will be a shoe that drops somewhere, whether that has to do with advertising or it gets sold, or I don't know. So something or other will happen that has to do with maximizing revenue or improving revenue. But I mean, I think they're fundamentally committed to just giving the blank page to creatives, and then having these networks that people are able to share in. And so long as they're committed to that and the algorithms don't determine people's experience on there, I'm not too worried about Substack. I think it's cool that there's more multimedia on there. I like this vision of, it's kind of like, well, why not kind of be what Vimeo seemed to be doing a few years ago and have a lot of video on here. Why not have all the podcasts? I'm fine with all of that. I think just so long as that freedom never gets taken away, that's fine. I was really worked up during the whole Jonathan M. Katz controversy over the winter. I was really worried that moderation would get set up, and moderation would that the whole platform would devolve into people trying to censor each other over different things. And so I was really pleased that Substack held pretty strong on that. And yeah, I mean, for me, it's just kind of blue skies with this. It feels like more and more people are on it. The challenge is, I'm probably going to have a piece tomorrow thinking this through, is that there's just so much that it's very hard to pay for any like individual Substack. And it's a little bit easy to get lost on the platform. So it's just sort of figuring out how to navigate through it, which I think has to do with being a little bit more focused in terms of sort of niches and genres. Right. And a lot of people are already doing this, where they show up and they'll sort of curate themselves, and they'll say, okay, like these are the best things in this genre. And I think that helps a little bit with the quality control.
Right. And during the winter, when the whole Cats thing happened, I was crossing my fingers and watching the whole thing without getting involved, because I'm not that interested in politics or online politics. But I was very impressed by the Substack staff, how they responded to it, and they definitely won me as a loyal fan in that event. And I hope that they continue to do that, and I hope they continue to allow a open platform where we can kind of make it what we want. What I think you're right about the problem is, how many Substacks can a person be subscribed to, payment wise? It's going to add up. Like, I think I'm paying way too much money on things that I don't even read as much anymore. I also have a subscription to the London Review of Books, but it's stacking on my desk, and I haven't read any of them in the last 5 months.
Yeah,
I'm so busy. But I think one of the things that I wish they address and they start kind of focusing on is being able to categorize your stuff better, being able to, I don't know, have like subdivisions where like, hey, these are all the podcasts about politics, these are all the podcasts about art. Maybe some better organization of the categories instead of just a giant block. Because going through your emails or your kind of new stuff feed, you've got like weird cartoons about something and a conversation about video games that I don't care about, and then a deep political discourse about Ukraine going on the same page. And it tends to be kind of a neurotic and schizophrenic almost in the way it's presented. Many categories. But yeah, I'm pretty positive on its future, and I'm glad there's people like you on it that are very serious and take it. How was the whole editing the Substack Reads newsletter?
Yeah, it was kind of overwhelming, actually. And I ended up thinking about these questions a lot. I mean, I guess how it's shaken up in my mind is sort of this whole distinction between being a platform and being a publication, which is pretty interesting. And so, I mean, it's very, very important to me that Substack stays as a platform, which means basically anybody can post, so long as it's not whatever imminent lawless action. It's all fair game. And that's been really important. I think that's why almost as a community, we sort of needed to have this content moderation talk to sort of think it through. But once those principles are sort of established for the platform, then there's kind of this extra conversation about what the publication side of it looks like, which I think means finding ways to privilege things that are a little bit more high quality. And that more has to be done just by word of mouth and through the community than anything else. probably anything that Substack does. What I did realize is that there's an explore page that Substack has that I sort of didn't really know existed before. And that's a pretty good way to navigate through the site, where you're just seeing, they do it by quantity. So you're seeing kind of the things that are hitting the best in each, and you can do it by category. So that's actually a pretty good way of saying, like, okay, here are the things that are really popping at the moment across the platform. What I do, and what I think most users do, and what they're pushing a little bit, is this feeling of like a scene, that you see the same people on the app all the time, and you see your newsletter, and it's great, but it also sort of feels like you're in this weird flea market, and you're just like picking up all these different things. And so I think what the platform probably should evolve towards is a little bit more of a sense of saying, like, okay, like, we are also putting out, we have the best writers in the world on this platform across every category you can think of. Here's, here's what your digest can be as a reader. And it's at least as good as anything that's in traditional media, because it's not, you don't have editors looking over your shoulder. You don't have owners looking over your shoulder. People are like writing as themselves. And just to get a little bit away from the feeling of like, it's this whole smorgasbord of stuff that's hard to get through, and a little bit more into, okay, if you have a limited amount of time on your hands, here's what we kind of suggest you read. And then by the way, there's millions of other things. That's probably the direction that I would imagine it goes in and should go in. But yeah, I mean, I'm kind of a changed man, to put it ridiculously, from having done Substack reads, because I just I didn't realize how much was out there, honestly. And it's almost more than you can sort of comprehend.
Right. I mean, I don't even have that many subscriptions, and I can't keep track of everything I'm reading. I have to remind
Yeah.
myself, like, oh, who wrote this? I follow like I'm subscribed to some of the big accounts on here, and it's like, wow, this guy exists again. I just remembered. But I think you're right. I think that is the future, and one thing I want them to do, and I don't know how they could implement this, but from a writer perspective, I would like the ability to sell digital novels off of my Substack, or like somehow like upload, like upload a Mobi like digital e-reader file of a novel and sell it that way, and make it as a store almost, for writing, or digital issues that you can download somebody's Substack onto the Kindle. That would be a great, awesome thing, I think, but might not happen at all,
Yeah.
because I think that would be cool. But yeah, I definitely think that a lot of people don't think about the whole curating element of it. You can't just have a platform that has absolutely no curation from its forward presentation, or else you'll get something like the old DeviantArt, where it's all just cartoon pornography, or anime stuff, and it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and it attracts a very degenerate kind of niche of weirdos that like their strange stuff. But at the same time, you don't want to turn into Facebook or Instagram, where it's just become, you don't have any friends on there anymore. It's just algorithm. I still have a Facebook. I got a Facebook back in the day when it was like invite only, and it was like college email only, and
Oh, look at you. Yeah.
it was good. It was good back then, because you used it to talk to all your friends. And what I mainly used it for was, you know, I would send a message, and it would be like, hey, I'm going to this restaurant tonight. Then we're going to go bar hopping down the street. If you want to join us, show up. And then like 40 people would read it, and some would show up, some wouldn't. And I would kind of like get to know where everybody was in the city during the day. Or, I would meet somebody at a bar, and they would give me their Facebook, and then I would add them, and then I would be like, hey, great time last night. And it kind of, Facebook Messenger defaulted as the everything messenger. But now you don't have any more friends on there. I logged on because I still talk to my grandma uses Facebook, so sometimes I log on there to say hello to her, and it's just like the feed is just advertising and bots. And the same
Yeah.
thing with Instagram. You see two of your friends' pictures, and then you're spammed by those like TikTok like videos of people dancing and just dumb stuff, and it's tedious, and it's not worth the time, and that's why Substack is so valuable and so great. So besides being a Substacker, you're a journalist, and you say you've been into journalism and documentary making for a long time. So in today's world, journalism in some circles has become a dirty word, right? Journalist
Yeah.
is not a favored profession, and I think a lot of that has to do with the partisanship and the disaster chasing of mainstream journalism, specifically television journalism. And what do you think about that? What do you think about the profession as a whole of journalism?
Yeah, well, it's definitely been dark days. I mean, so I graduated college in 2008, and I wanted to be a journalist. And right at that moment, the bottom fell out of the whole profession. And so for the next couple of years, I was trying to break in some different ways, and I couldn't really do it. I couldn't make a living doing it. And then I was got kind of an invitation basically into documentary filmmaking, which was really hitting almost sort of a gold rush at that time, that it had to do with what was going on with streaming. So it sort of worked, but I've really wanted journalism to come through that period. And I think a lot of it has to do with journalism reimagining itself in some ways. Some of it does have to do with going back to brass tacks. There's this interview that the Joseph Kahn, the editor in chief of executive editor of the New York Times, gave in Semaphore this week, when he was saying that it's almost like the New York Times has really drifted away from journalism fundamentals in the later part of the 2010s, and it really needs to go back to just sort of both sides, traditional both sides reporting. And that's the point he was making. And that's really important, that it's as simple as, like, there are two sides of every story, and you have to do some shoe leather reporting to get at ground truth. And it's become harder to do because nobody has the budget for foreign bureaus and this kind of stuff. And so, but on the other hand, everybody's more networked than they ever have been. So I think there are ways of doing it that don't involve going back to the 19th century bureau model. And then, so that's on the one hand. On the other hand, I mean, I think there's just a lot to be said for the slightly more individualistic approach. I mean, at this point, I've sort of crossed over into preferring to read some of the Substackers to reading traditional media, because I know that they're speaking as individuals rather than as an institution. And so if they say, they give you kind of what they know at that point, they tell you where they're leaning, and I find that more informative than sort of the old style. So I think there's actually a very nice moment, and this kind of aligns with my own tastes of journalism, like really thinking through what it wants to be, because a lot of what journalism has been for a while has to do with basically what these like industrial revolution technologies were. And it just doesn't have to be that anymore, that you can really use the resources of the internet, and you can use the resources of the sort of global village, just a tighter global network to tell a lot of stories and to evince a genuine curiosity about the world.
Right, definitely a long form journalism. And I mean, I think we can lament the death of the newspaper in a way. When I was growing up, I was a news junkie in Southern California, so I read the Los Angeles Times, and I read the OC Register, which was the conservative kind of newspaper in the area. And then there was a great like local free magazine. I don't know if you guys had this in New York, but it was called the OC Weekly. It was a weekly. It had the back end was all like punk rock shows that are going on, and sex ads, and then the front actually had some really good hard hitting journalism. specifically in the late 90s, early 2000s, but they're all gone. All, the business model didn't work. It, disappeared. It shut down. The LA Times is basically unreadable now. It's just
Yeah.
opinion pieces. That's all it really is. So I've kind of like moved on. I've given up completely on anything like mainstream, and I stick to like long form personal journalism on Substack or on some of the other blogs and podcasts and that kind of stuff. But even then, there's so much subjectivity, and so I guess we live in a world of the subjective. It's going to be hard to take to accept institutional truth from any of the media. So I think it will depend on like a journalist individually making a name for themselves and kind of becoming the gold standard with their own writing and earning the trust of the reader, as opposed to being under the flag of something like the New York Times, which no longer holds that bipartisan, kind of cachet it used to have. One of the worst things, I hate getting into politics, but the Trump era seems to have really messed up with the brains of a lot of journalists in the
Yeah.
mainstream,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they became addicted to the WWF wrestling match element of politics. And
Right.
every article was the end of the world, and every article was, any minute now, Trump is going to grow a tiny mustache and jackboot his way through. And it got old. It got really old. The hysteria and the insanity of the whole situation got old. And I see it coming back again. And I'm just like, oh, I want to block everything to do with politics, because I do not want to hear another cycle of the imminent rise of American fascism or whatever the hell they're going to be on about this time. But that did cause a lot of loss of confidence in everybody. And
Yeah.
the reporting around COVID also caused a lot of loss of confidence. So yeah, we're kind of in a new world, a no man's land of independent journalism and kind of finding truth, in all the different elements. We're more like a little birds eating tiny little food, as opposed to you know. But it's rough. So you originally got into journalism, then you did documentary stuff, and now you're basically mostly focused on your Substack, right? Are you doing any more journalism outside of your essays on Substack?
Yeah, I'm an editor at Persuasion, which is on the Substack platform, and which is great. It's mostly politics. It's both. It has kind of two sides to it. One is basically international coverage, so it's picking up on things from around the world, and then it's very focused on free speech. So it's exactly what you're talking about. It's exactly this coming from this feeling of just the left really kind of unfortunately lost, and liberal institutions especially really um, really lost their minds kind of during the Trump era and sort of during COVID. And so it's just a way of trying to wrestle back towards the center and towards these sort of old fashioned free speech values where you're being a bit more balanced. So that's a lot of what Persuasion is about. I have involvement with documentaries. There's been a couple of projects that I've been working on recently about veterans that have been just really powerful and interesting. And then I'm teaching journalism in Central Asia, and I do some journalism here as well.
That's fantastic. So I will definitely actually look into Persuasion. I have not read anything on there yet, but I did bookmark the link, and I think I followed it on Substack. Um, so one of the topics that's been kind of in the sphere the last few weeks, and especially in like my sphere of like independent writing, independent literature, is the whole AI art thing and the AI as a
Yeah.
whole. And I know you've written about technofuturism and that type of thing, and I'm an anti-techno-futurist.
Yeah.
It's not that I am not the doom and gloom. I don't think that it's going to turn into Skynet and take us over. I'm actually just not impressed by AI, and I think that a lot of it is the Wizard of Oz. I think there's nothing there, and I don't like it. So what are your feelings on the whole AI future?
Yeah, I mean, I am anti. I really, it really spooks me. My basic feeling with it, the thing I'd sort of compare it to is sort of what happened with the Industrial Revolution. Basically, the Industrial Revolution just sort of wiped out traditional agriculture and essentially blue collar work. And in a way, that entire universe of people is sort of never really recovered from that. People just sort of left the land and went to the cities and found different ways of doing things. And I sort of feel like AI is coming for white collar jobs in the same way. Um, I've been relieved that AI art is so crappy, that it seems to have been so crappy in the last couple of years. So that's a bit of good news, actually. But I think it will get really good, and I think people will be able to do things like create their own movies on without involving anybody, and remixing actors from different eras, and people will be able to do all kinds of different things with it, and a lot of it will be amazing and a lot of it will be inspiring, but it will have a tendency of just shifting us away from humanness. And so what I've been kind of preaching with this is that it's an opportunity for us to think a little bit more about what really matters, and focusing a little bit more on EQ. It's like we've spent the last 500 years basically developing this machine to replace our own IQ, and now we've done it, and now we've rendered ourselves superfluous, and we have in a whole bunch of fields. And so it's kind of a moment to say, like, okay, anything that the AI can do is not the me myself, is not the essential thing, and to sort of focus a little bit more on that. So I mean, for me, it just does some things like in my writing, I've been paying much less attention to sort of like technical virtuosity, and I've been paying more attention to just like, okay, what were the experiences that I've had in my life that I want to share? And the reason it matters isn't because it's like good. It's not about being good at the activity. It's because this is meaningful to me, and it might be meaningful to other human beings. So it's been a little bit helpful for me to sort of almost reframe myself in that way. But I think I mean, it's useful in all kinds of ways, but I think it's going to do a lot of damage. It's just sort of we don't even know all the ways it's going to kind of damage us going forward.
Right. And growing up, I saw myself as a techno positive individual. I was one of those guys, one of those kids that my dad got a PC when I was really young, and I took it apart and put it together and learned how to use like Windows and learned how to do basic coding. And I did all that stuff on my own. I thought that the future was going to be Star Trek: The Next Generation future, where technology is going to make our life better. And I haven't been impressed. I haven't been impressed. I'm sitting here 40, 41 years old, and I'm looking back, and I feel like we've reached people talk about the singularity, but the singularity I see is the singularity of just crap, to the point where the stuff that keeps on coming out no longer makes our life better, but it actually makes our life worse. Or it makes it more annoying and lamer. You have things that just don't work. You have
Yeah.
every piece of technology we see, and so much of the new stuff that comes out is stuff that purports itself to make your life better or faster or cooler, but it actually is just dumb. It makes it
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
more tedious. So in my industry, I work in healthcare. Where I work, they just recently adopted a brand new digital medical records program. Now, we were using an old one, which was fantastic, and it worked perfectly fine, and I could do everything instantly. But no, we needed to go super fancy and have all this crazy integration. And it is the worst designed program I've ever worked with. It's horrible. Something that used to take 2 clicks now takes like 45 clicks to do something basic. It crashes all the time, and it's just a mess, but it's fresh and new. So we had to spend billions of dollars on it or whatever. Um, and one of the things I realized is that switching to this new program completely changed the way we did things. Instead of the program fitting smoothly into our workflow, into our, the way we deal with day-to-day, life, we have to change everything to match the program. So instead of the tool working for us, we work for the tool. And so much
Right.
new technology seems to be that it's no longer a tool which is an extension of our human bodies or our intellect. It becomes it uses us as a tool to self-propagate itself. And you see that in a lot of stuff with, these kind of constant wireless digital everything, where we're constantly having to do things in order to make the technology that's supposed to help us work. And
Right.
that's how I feel about AI. I feel like it's just going to make everything even lamer. The last thing the internet
Yeah.
needs is more junk. And, you know, AI art, and I said this on Walt Bismarck's podcast, it just looks cheap. It looks like the kind of stuff that, Chinese scammers put on Instagram when they sell those like janky like phone games.
Yeah.
And we're just completely filled with it, just trash. There's no there's no fear that you're going to lose high intellectual content. All right, the AI is never going to, because it lacks intuition, it lacks soul, it lacks a spirit, but it's going to fill our entire world with just more trash. It's basically uh, digital littering is what AI is going to do. And
Right.
you know what I mean? It's basically going to fill if the internet's rivers, it's going to just they're going to become sludge because of AI. A friend of mine, he's a great editor, lives in France. He thinks that what AI is going to do is push everybody towards the real. It's going to make it to the point where we're constantly going to question, am I talking to a real person? Am I reading something from a real person? And it's going to cause a desire in humans to find authentic things, to focus on authenticity. And I think we're going to see, if in the very near future, ways to prove that you're human, ways to prove that you're natural and organic instead of an algorithm. And I've noticed that in a lot of my personal friends and family and acquaintances' use of the internet. A decade ago, I would say at the height of what I thought was the good internet, I could hop on Google, type in one of my friends' names, like an ex-girlfriend or something like that, and I would instantly find everything about them, and I would know where, hey, there's her Facebook, and here's her Instagram, and I can, send her a message. Now you can try it yourself. You can't find anybody anymore. Everybody's gone. A lot of people are disconnected, and I work with a lot of young Gen Zers,
Mhm.
which is really cool because it allows me to stick and understand the younger generation, and none of them use social media. They don't.
Oh, really?
They
Okay.
they barely use the internet. I think they use like the occasional dating apps and messengers, but there is no. I'm not really sure how old you are. I'm guessing around same age, based
Yeah.
on right. Um, they don't use MySpace like we did. There's nothing like that. There's no, uh, kind of like universal thing that everybody uses, and that's a good thing. And I think that we are going to move towards a rejection of the mass digital, towards a more personal, more organic internet. But we shall see. All right, my predictions might be completely wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. You're definitely more optimistic than I am. Um,
Right.
yeah. I mean, I guess I came across this phrase, the enshittification of everything recently. Somebody was making this argument that, yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting how a lot of the tech platforms have been getting progressively worse. Google, the dating apps, especially in the last couple of years, have gotten sort of noticeably worse after they've become just such a staple of everybody's lives. And there's a whole theory for almost like a mathematical theory for why that's the case. So yeah, I mean, it's a funny development that basically all dating life in my generation, our generation, pretty much went online at some point, and then just that system started to break down. So it's like, how does anybody date anymore? I have no idea. If it's true that people just kind of junk it and go back to real life, that's great. Uh, but I suspect it's not quite that. It's a little bit more like you have the technology, and then it's like you have this gleaming new subway in your city, and then that just decays over time, and you sort of get used to it, and then eventually some new way of getting around shows up and half replaces that, and then the old thing is still half around. But yeah, I mean, I think there were a lot of wrong turns that were basically made in the 2010s. Social media is basically very dark. The Web 2.0 is essentially very dark. AI is a continuation of a lot of it. I agree with I think pretty much all your assessment of AI. And what I would love there to be is a turn away from that and to just sort of say, like, hey, the internet, these things, the technology, it should work for us. We're not so awestruck by the newness of it anymore. We know its flaws. Now we're going to try to take ownership over it. Substack for me is very much that. I'm just focused on that because I'm kind of a writing person, but I'm sure there are other platforms. I'm not sure, but maybe there are other platforms that are doing similar kinds of things where people are just saying, like, okay, this is my space. I'm not going to give it over to an algorithm. I'm not going to give it over to whoever owns my network. I'm going to control it. And if I don't like it, then I'm going to move on to somewhere else. And so it's like maybe we're learning to live with the internet a little bit more than we did for the last 10 or 15 years, 20 years, when we were basically beta testing it, or it was sort of beta testing us.
Right. And I think that the technocrats on the West Coast, the California guys, their vision of the internet was that it's this all-consuming kind of matrix, this overlay of this meta world, like almost like a spiritual world, but digital, on top of everything we do, and we as the users are part of it. Like we are part of the world, the digital world itself. Like we're product and consumer at the same time, and I think that we have to reject that idea. And I see a lot of
Yeah.
rejection of that idea. I mean, we're getting to the age where we can tell 20-year-olds now, remember when the internet was good? Do you remember when you actually could believe Yelp?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's an interesting thing. Yelp, for an example, when Yelp came out, at least in Los Angeles when I was younger, it was great. Everybody
Yeah.
used Yelp, and we would find all kinds of fantastic restaurants. My wife and I used to go around and write Yelp reviews of like our favorite little spots, and we'd always
Yeah.
trust people, and we'd always go with that. But now it's become enshittified and it's fake. We know that like it extorts people and paying money for better reviews and that type of thing. We know half the stuff is bought, so you can't trust it anymore. So I live in a very touristy area in South Carolina in the Low Country, right outside of Savannah, and we have a lot of restaurants, and nobody uses online to read the stuff anymore because it's filled either with obvious bots or with morons complaining about like something like, why doesn't the Italian restaurant serve Chinese food or something like that.
Okay.
So everybody goes off of the local newspaper. There's like a Best of Lufton that we've got, and that's what people base their choices on, restaurant and
Oh,
word of
interesting.
mouth.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like we've rejected the overall digital atmosphere. And I think that's the future. I think that what we need to do is we need to say, okay, the internet is not a world of its own. We are not part of this realm. The internet is a tool, and we're going to use it as a tool individually, like different websites, different applications. I don't want to be completely subsumed in a digital panopticon where my refrigerator is telling me like what to do, and my freaking Amazon thing is talking to me. I don't want that. I want to. There's some fantastic things on the internet. We are on the internet right now, right? I love Spotify. I love being able to stream podcasts while I'm driving anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. I love Google Maps and that type of thing. But I want to be able to say no. I don't want it all the time. I don't want it to be on all the time. I don't want it to be around me all the time. And I think that's the future we need to cultivate. And that's my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, I really agree. I had a moment, I don't know if it was a moment, but I sort of had this epiphany a few years ago where it's like, as a society, we have this religion, and the religion is progress. And actually, you don't really have to believe in progress. And most people in most points in human history haven't. The Greeks and Romans actually didn't have a vision of kind of forward moving progress, really, and they did fine. And different societies do different things. I mean, Chinese came up with all these technologies, and then at some point they basically said, like, you know what, forget it. We don't really want to do this stuff. And you actually can set up these guardrails against it. It's hard for us because we've been spending the West. We've been spending like 300 or 400 years just really believing in this stuff. Growth is always good, and I think at some point you get to certain technologies where you have to say, like, well, maybe not. You know, you get to the nuclear weapons, you get to these just super destructive technologies. I think we got to it with cloning actually in the 90s, different things where we just kind of say, like, wait a minute, maybe there is some other value here. And but it's hard because it's like we all have this sort of bug in our brain that tells us that whatever is new has to be better. And it's just not the case. And so I think just the more that people can kind of turn that switch in themselves and say, like, well, not necessarily, the better off we'll be. It's not that growth, it's not that the opposite of progress is true. It's not that things that as everything moves forward, it gets worse. It's just that it's like a value neutral thing. You know, different technologies develop, different activities develop, and they always have their trade-offs. And so I think just the more we kind of think in those terms, the better off we'll be.
Right. And it's about permanence and quality, quality of experience and quality of life. I think it's about, slowing down and appreciating where we are instead of constantly waiting for, the new car to come out or the new iPhone to come out or the new whatever to come out. And, we, in our generation, it was fun to make fun of the hipster crowd, the LA hipsters or the New York hipsters. But I love those guys. And the reason I love those guys is because there was a focus on the authentic and like the vintage and the quality, where it's like, yeah, I don't want the best new beer. I just want the one that's made by the guy next door. And
Mm-hmm.
there was almost a very traditionalist conservative element to that crowd. And a lot of that crowd's now become a farmers market crowd, where they're growing their own strawberries and kiwis and stuff and selling them at the Ojai markets. But I think that's the world I want. I want the world where we stop and go, hey, how about we get something quality? Or does this new piece of technology, does it make my life better? Does it make me happy if I engage in it? Does it make the people around me happier? Does it make our neighborhood more pleasant? Does it make it more beautiful? Or is it ugly? Or should I reject it? And I think that's kind of the ethic or the aesthetic sense that we need to. I want to push forward, but we shall see. We can't predict the future.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I was always so sucky with technology that I've kind of been rooting against these things just based off of that.
Just like, no, I'm done with it.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I keep trying to short all these different things. I mean, I was sure when Twitter came out, I was sure that it was like Tamagotchis, that it was just gonna come and go so fast. So basically I've been wrong about everything. I mean, it's just Twitter at its essence seemed so dumb that it seemed like it had to not last. And then of course Twitter goes on to be the defining thing of our era and sort of subsumes everything else. So I mean, the rule so far has been whatever the dumbest thing is in the culture is prevailed.
But you know what? To give a white pill, a positive thing about it, everybody seems to have rejected that idiotic Apple Vision thing. So
Well, I think it's just because it's too heavy right now. I think it's going to come back.
but what does it do? It doesn't do anything that's interesting. It doesn't do anything that you can do on your own. And that's kind of why I was like, I'm not interested in that. Just how I felt about the iPad. The iPad's like, cool. All right. What does this thing do that my cell phone can't do? And why do I want this thing? Like, and I had a bunch of friends that bought them and are like, oh, I watch videos on it while you're sitting on the couch next to your TV. Like, this is the stupidest thing ever. You spend $1,000 on something that does nothing compared to your television. And do you write on it? Do you, it's just dumb and it's just useless. Like the whole, Apple phones, I mean, watches and stuff. It's like, oh, look, I get text messages on my phone. I'm like, I don't want to get text messages on my phone or my watch or anywhere because I don't want to talk to anybody if I don't have to. So I think there's some people rejecting that. But I do want to steer the conversation to more pleasant things before we call it a day. Um, you also write book reviews and movie reviews, and the the film industry is kind of all over the place now with all the different AI issue and the whole trade unions, the writers guilds and all that kind of stuff, actors guilds, and it's hard to really get into movies. And I saw on your Substack that you watched all the big award movies this year, and
I did, yeah.
I only managed to catch one. Every year I do the same. I try to watch every single one that wins an Academy Award or every single one. In the last few years, I've kind of lost interest. And this year, I've only caught one, and that was The Anatomy of a Fall, which I actually really liked.
Yeah.
What was your favorite out of that batch?
Poor Things. Poor Things is fabulous.
Okay, I have not seen it. I've been waiting for it to like be in
Yeah.
the right mood
Yeah.
for it.
Yeah. Poor Things is staggeringly great. And American Fiction is right up there. And Killers of the Flower Moon is up there too. Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff being made. Actually, Anatomy of a Fall was great. Uh, they were all good. So
Do you go to movie theaters or do you usually just watch stuff at home?
no, of course not. It's all streamed.
Oh, you know what?
I
I
think
forgot. I That was a dumb question because you're in,
no, I was in New York at the time. I think
okay.
I saw a couple in movie theaters, but it's the majority of it is streamed. I like kind of lists, so I get in this dorky place where something comes out and it's nice for me to just kind of like power through a bunch of these movies at once. But yeah, I mean I feel like I've gotten a little bit into a grouchy place in my writerly persona where I keep trying to rail against different things, and I really do get very upset about a lot of contemporary novels I read and some different things in journalism. And then, but then if you like really dig through culture, it's like, whoa, like this thing is great and that thing is great. And I mean, there's just a lot of talented people out there, and they against all possible odds, they somehow figure out a way to do it across like every genre.
Right, I agree. Now, book wise, what writers do you enjoy? First of all, okay, what are your big fiction novel inspirations as a writer? Because I know you write fiction yourself.
Yeah.
What are your like top three that like inspired you to write or your favorite to read?
Oh, it's a really good question. J.M. Kitsia, who I've never known how to pronounce his last name. I think he's the best contemporary writer. Alan Hollinghurst is pretty important to me. Actually, Mary Gateskill, who's on Substack. Um, I think Saramago when I was in college. Milan Kundera is really important. Um, I think when I started writing seriously, the what I was drawn to almost kind of a neoclassicalism in a way, that the idea was that I wasn't that interested in formal innovation. It just seemed kind of pretentious, something to me, and I didn't have any ideas for what to do with it. So it was a little bit like, I just want to write about the world as it is. I want to use kind of the classical realist tools, but those guys had these limitations that they couldn't write very explicitly about sex, for instance.
Right.
And so I just felt like there was an opening to write in almost sort of a traditional way about kind of contemporary sex life. So Alan Hollinghurst was doing that. But yeah, I mean, there are people like Ketsia and Thornton Wilder. I mean, they can do things that I can't even figure out how they managed to do it.
Absolutely. And does does where you live have a healthy bookstore kind of environment, or do you mostly get
No,
everything? No.
No, there's no English language books here. I've crossed over. I had this thing last year where I was so overwhelmed with screens and phones that I made myself go to the bookstore and buy one book at a time and just read that book to the end, pretty much no matter what, before I'd go on to the next one. But now that I'm doing more reviews and I've kind of figured out how to get review copies digitally, I've sort of switched over to doing that more. And it's mostly works. It is harder to do for fiction. I think it is hard to read a novel on my phone.
So I'm a Kindle reader. My wife bought me a Kindle like a decade ago, and I've gone to so I do a lot of travel, and I can't carry 40 books with me on a trip. So usually when I'm gone for 2 3 months, I download like 20 new books onto Kindle, and I read those while I'm in the plane or do on my downtime. So I've become a fan of Kindle reading to where I have a hard time reading actual paper novels now. Um, so I'm kind of trying to teach myself again how to read fiction on paper. And it's rough because I'm so used to just laying in bed and holding my tiny Kindle, and it's a Paperwhite, so I can just swipe, I can highlight and save stuff on it. But I'm starting to re-enjoy, kind of have a new affair with the printed page, which I like, and it increased my
Yeah.
collection. Um, Now, where I live, there's not a huge bookstore kind of environment either. I mean, Savannah, Georgia has a few
Mhm.
bookstores that are good. It's mostly mainstream stuff. But I was impressed when I went and visited Bucharest last year, how many amazing bookstores they had there. And I was so jealous that I don't live there because it's like every block there seemed to be a new bookstore, and it had, things in English, German, French, everything. And I was
Yeah.
like, wow, these guys really like freaking reading. Like, and they were packed. They were packed. And it's interesting how different places have different reading cultures. And I really hope. I'm also very positive on the novel itself. I don't think the novel is dying, and I think that the
Yeah.
novel cannot be replaced by film. It weathered that storm, and until you can directly feel the feelings of a character through some kind of Elon Musk Neuralink, the novel is going to be the closest thing
Yeah.
to just that pure transmission of information and emotion. So I think
Yeah.
we still got a few good years left in the novel.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that. I think the novel definitely has resources that other media, that visual media don't. I mean, it can just go into people's inner lives much more so. I mean, the other thing about novels is that they're cheaper and they're more individualized. So, I mean, I was working on all these different film projects, and I didn't like it that much. I mean, there were pieces of it that I liked, but it's really, really hard to express yourself if you're. I mean, most of what you're doing if you're working on these projects is it's politics involving different people on the project, and maybe the director maybe gets sort of creative say. And but if I'm sitting down, I'm writing a short story or I'm writing a novel, it's just me in there, and so it's excruciating in a different way because I mean, you're really facing yourself. But I mean, I just find it to be gazillions of times more satisfying than the producing work that I was doing. So I mean, that's been a whole theme in my life. Just mentioning bookstores, yeah. I mean, I've realized fairly recently that bookstores are much more politically divided than I think people realize. Like, if you go to a bookstore and kind of an indie bookstore in New York, you are not going to find Jordan Peterson. You are not going to find a lot of people who are considered to be inflammatory, and it's a real problem actually. Like, I remember it was in the Dallas airport and finding like RFK's book and finding all these different things that were there that were just available. And it was a shock to me. I was realizing like, oh, the reading public, depending on where you are in the country, is actually seeing very different things. And the booksellers are sort of picking and choosing along political lines much more than I think they should. So, I mean, that doesn't take, it doesn't make me want to shop on Amazon, and it doesn't take away from the value of reading an actual printed book, but it does put me a little bit more into this kind of archive.org or Substack space where I'm just a little bit more interested in what the more kind of democratic side of the web is giving to me.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I've noticed that here also. There's two big independent bookstores very near me, and one tends to kind of lean into like liberal kitsch kind of. You walk in and you've got the rainbow flags and all the Michelle Obama kind of books and anime and that type of thing, all the current current news type of stuff. And then you go to the other bookstore across town and it tends to be the exact opposite, where you'll find
Yeah.
you know some older stuff, and the clientele is different. It's very polarized. Now, one thing about writing, so, and I'm going to kind of tie it in with the technology thing, right? I keep on hearing this whole thing about like attention spans are gone and people don't want to read long stuff anymore. It's all bite-sized internet stuff. And I've noticed a paradox about that, where we keep on saying that people don't want to read big things. But if you go to your bookstore, if you go to a local book club, which surprisingly there's a lot of book clubs where I live,
Yeah.
everything they're reading is these massive, massive tomes. All right.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably all crap because it's all like, dragon fantasy and fairy pornography that all the women read, right? But these
Yeah.
things are massive. My wife is in a book club and she's reading I think it's like Sarah J. Maas something, where like 17 volumes of it, and each one of them is like 2,000 pages. And it's like, I think that the paradox is that I think that the people that say that there's no attention span are wrong. I think that people are
Yeah.
craving
Yeah.
a deeper, more immersive element. They want to be immersed in a novel. I think they want to move away from minimalism, and they want the 7 chapters of the elf making tea or something like that. Um,
Yeah.
and it shows. Like, go if back in the U.S., stop by Barnes and Noble and look at the popular books, and the non-lit fiction is just these massive tomes. So
Yeah.
there's something there. My personal view on writing as a whole is that I think that the worst thing that a lot of writers do is they tend to be inspired not by fiction but by film. So
Hmm.
they tend to try to write scenes that make sense in a like a film, behind the camera kind of situation.
Right. Right.
When
Right.
I think that writers today need to lean into everything a movie cannot do. Like I always tell people, I want my work to be unfilmable.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
why write instead of just make a movie if it's
Yeah.
filmable? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Exactly.
So that's kind of how I feel. I think that, fiction wise, we should lean into the unfilmable. We should lean into the strengths of the fiction and the written word in the novel by focusing on things like, time hops and the interiority of the characters, which can never happen in film. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the new Dune movies. That's a very internal novel that just doesn't work in film format, in my opinion.
Yeah. Interesting. Uh, yeah. You said a few things I want to respond to. As usual, I agree with what you're saying. Yeah. I mean, a lot of what I found myself gravitating to in making work is to really trying to follow the form. There was like, there's this restaurant in my neighborhood, and my girlfriend hated it, and it's called Buster's, and it just had like no frills. There's like nothing on the walls, and no, they wouldn't use any sauce. And just sort of the idea was that you have like the ingredients, and like you really craft a dish just based on kind of the truth of what the ingredients are giving you. And that made a lot of sense to me. That, like, if I sit down to write a play, a lot of what I'm thinking about is like, okay, what is the form of a blank stage? Like, what is that giving to me? And same thing for a short story or whatever it is. And I mean, to some extent, that's sort of a crutch that I use, but it's but I kind of believe in that you really have to sort of trust the form and write. So what a novel gives you is it gives you interiority, it gives you cheapness, it gives you individual economy, individuality, and it gives you these resources, things like time jumps, like just different things that in order to do in a film takes many millions of dollars, and it gives you the imagination of the reader in a way that film doesn't. So I mean, I agree with that completely. There's something else you said I wanted to pick up on.
Book length, people reading
Book length, yeah, right. Attention spans, book length. I mean, that's a weird conversation because, right, the conventional wisdom is always like it's all about sound bites. Nobody has attention spans, and then Joe Rogan makes hundreds of millions of dollars, and most of his episodes are like 4 hours of talking to an archaeologist about Atlantis.
Right.
And it's like, why, like, how all of a sudden do people have the attention span for this when we thought they had no attention span? And right, what you're saying that people will read these hulking novels. So it's pretty important to not buy into the hype with that. I mean, on the other hand, obviously there's some truth to it. I put my short stories online. Nobody ever reads them, and I get it. It's that on the internet, people want things sort of fast. I'm a little bit like that. I tend to want things to deliver a point to me rather than to be like living in immersion for kind of its own sake. But the main thing I agree with you on is that novelists in general have sort of lost confidence in their form. And right, a lot of them are doing it to basically get their book optioned ultimately for a movie. And they don't really believe in the form in a way that I think people did in sometimes I read people from the 50s and 60s, and it's like, wow, even though Hollywood is there, they really believe that the novel is it. And they're just putting a huge amount of creative energy into the form. And it's pretty rare to see that, actually.
Right. And it's kind of sad. I'm in the camp that I am not, I am a novelist myself, and I'm about to send my finished draft to my editor soon. But I have no desire ever, ever to have anything of mine turned into a movie or anything like that. It feels like, I guess I would feel violated if I sat in the theater and saw my creation through somebody. I would feel like watching your girlfriend with somebody else. I don't know. That's how I would feel. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a weird person like that. And I'm sure that if somebody gives me a huge check, I'd be like, oh, okay, whatever,
Yeah, you might change your point
I
of view.
might change my mind. But at the same time, I've never had that like desire that a lot of writers do. They
Yeah.
just want that option. They want that option. And it's like, no, but I hate this stuff. I hate
Yeah.
90% of movies that come out there. All right, Sam, we've been talking for a long time. We went almost 20 minutes past what we were aiming for. But before we go, are you writing anything? What are you working on? What projects are you working on that we should look into?
Yeah. I mean, basically my whole inner world is pretty much up on Substack. So that's most of it. I mean, I spent the last end part of last year doing the blunder of writing a historical novel. So it turned into a 500-page novel about Operation Torch, which you may know is the invasion of North Africa in 1942. So it's sort of this moment of the U.S. really coming to arriving as an international power. And it gave me an opportunity to think about Ukraine, to think about just a lot of things that were going on right now. I have no idea if that'll ever get published. So right now I'm working on another novel. I'm trying to make shorter, and I really like to write. So I'm just cranking out writing basically.
Right, that's fantastic. So to all the listeners here, who have the patience to listen to us talk about books and AI for an hour and a half, which surprisingly, there's thousands of you, right? Make sure you go to Sam's Substack because it is hands down one of the best Substacks out there. And Sam, thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you on the show, and consider the invitation open for the future, okay? And for listeners, remember to follow, like, share, and discuss today's episode across as many platforms as possible.